Welcome back, guys and girls. And in this episode, we're going to talk about product managers, we're going to talk about product teams, and we're going to talk about the lean methodology, and we're going to talk about sprints. So before I dig into the actual product work, let me talk about the different kind of people involved and how they work with each other. So let's get right to the deck. Awesome, so let's begin. So your role as a product manager is very similar to the project manager role that used to exist in the past, because more and more businesses are becoming technology businesses. In fact, I would argue that all businesses are becoming technology businesses. Your role is to form the bridge between customers, the business, and the technology development and design teams. So talking to users, understanding their behaviors, and many of those times those behaviors are irrational, right? They're not logical behaviors. And you'll realize this very soon in your product management or project management career. It's a core part of your job, right? Understanding human beings. Like I said, all of these things, psychology underlies it. Right, so here's a typical product team. You have the product management team, you have the software engineering team, and you have the design teams. So it's like a simple triad, and the product management team obviously gets the requirements. It figures out what the customer wants, it plans out a roadmap, and then it figures out what parts of the roadmap we haven't built yet, these are called backlog, and what parts we've actually created, which is the delivery. And then there's a software engineering team, which is about architecture, it's about development, it's about figuring out what stack to use, how do we test things, how do we do DevOps, which is how do we manage when we push a new feature. And remember, right, until now we've been fairly generic about the type of products we've been building. But now I'm specifically going to talk about software and IoT products and technology products in general. So things like architecture, development, testing, and DevOps, they're very specific to tech startups. And if you're watching this, you are probably interested in a tech startup. And even if you have an e-commerce store, you could categorize it as a tech startup. So you have on the design side, you have somebody figuring out what the users like to see, what the competitors are using. You have interaction design, which is how do the users interact with your platform. The service design, which is how is the service being provided. And then product validation, which is you go to different people and you figure out, do these people like it? This is the lean method. I'm a big fan of the lean method. It's basically, there's a bunch of keywords: design thinking, lean, startup, agile. I don't like the keywords used because I think that people should in generally think design first. I think it's a natural part. And if you're doing the Meta platform, if you're doing all of our content, you will become a design first kind of person. It's just how the Meta platform is structured. So you can't tell what the market will respond to. We've beaten that horse dead. You need to ask the users themselves and then see what works and what doesn't. You have to be water, in the words of Bruce Lee, which is find a place where you think there's revenue potential, but don't make too many assumptions about it. Move where you need to move. Flexible persistence. Right, so run many experiments and throw out the ones that don't work. This, you probably remember this from the Avalon way. Keep the ones that do. So we use Mixpanel, which is a data analytics tool, or Google Analytics, which is the simplest and free analytics tool. You can just go ahead and make a Google Analytics account and to measure which parts your users are responding to. And then you build products using something called sprints. Because you see, developers, their time and their energy is better spent in bursts, right? Nobody can work continuously day on day on day. You're not going to get anything done. Right, so instead work in like 2 or 3 week periods where there's a lot of hard work, then take a break for a while. So as you can see from that kind of graph on the left, you come up with some idea. First you empathize, obviously you try to figure out what people want, you define a problem, then you ideate a solution, you try different experiments, you either stay, which is if it works, you continue doing it. If it doesn't work, you move and do something else. You measure what works. If it doesn't work, you learn from it, and then you keep building and iterating. And then you do that, the actual execution, the building the product, using something called a sprint, which is you have a bunch of features you want to create in this sprint. In the next 14 days, I have these features to create. You execute that, which is people actually sit and write code and do design and whatnot. You have something that's shippable. You have a version 1 or version 2 or whatever, and then you throw that away. You kind of put that on the market and see how people respond. And then go back, and if it works, you keep doing it. If it doesn't work, you learn from it and change something and pivot. Right? Pivot means essentially change what you're doing. So this is a nice meme I have on the left. If I were our teenage girl target, I would love our new product. And then somebody on the team asks that person, have you actually talked to any to make sure? And another guy says, what? And leave this room? So product managers rarely know what their users or customers want, which is why I believe that if you suffered from a problem yourself, and I put that, in the last but one point, if you've suffered from the problem yourself, you don't need to talk to other people too much, right? Which is why I can go ahead and literally put out all of Meta's content, because I understand the pain point and suffering of everybody, whether you want to learn how to build products or if you want to learn how to do design. I've been through all of that, right? So I don't have to talk to that many users. Whereas if I was building a startup, and I'll give you my own example on this, right? When I was building JobSpire, because I didn't understand the recruitment space so well, I did not know what a notice period was till 6 months after I had raised capital. And I had raised 1.72 crores. 6 months, I didn't even know what a notice period was, right? So I wasn't my target user. I had never had a job. In fact, even today, I've never had a job. So it was hard for me to understand that point, but I had to speak to a lot of people before I finally fully understood that ecosystem and that industry. But after 3 years of doing it, I mean, at this point, I kind of know what it's about, and I know the nitty-gritties. So users and paying customers are two different audiences. You have to remember this. Somebody like you who's coming and consuming the content for free, or if you're somebody who's paid for the content, for us, you two are different buckets, right? And the person who's paying has to be treated obviously much, much better, given a wonderful experience, but we can't alienate the free user either. Paying customers will get technical really fast. If the platform is free and you came in and there was a bug, you'd be okay to you just be like, yeah, that's fine. But if you were a paying customer, you would get really upset that there's a bug on the platform, right? Because you paid for it. So users and customers rarely know what they want before you see it. So when you're doing your research and you're talking to users, show them. What I like to do is I like to carry small mockups, and I tell users, is this okay? Is this something that you would pay for? Is this something that you would buy? How would you use this? Or I'd actually give them a live demo. So I'm going to show you a live example where I talk to a potential user. This is a random user who wants to use the Meta platform, and I'm just going to tell the person, or I'm going to ask the person a few questions on Skype. Here's how it's done. Here's my call recording and my video recording. The next thing you need to know is you need to have the ability to write stories. And by stories, I don't mean a book, right? I don't mean an entire Harry Potter or whatever. I mean, you need to be able to write user stories. So when you talk to a user, you write a story with what they want and what benefit they can expect. So you write something called a user story, which goes like this. As a user role, I want goal, so that benefit. So I could say something along the lines of, as a admin, I want login access to the dashboard so that I can delete a user, right? It's goes like that. And you write acceptance criteria so that the user role has some basic requirements to perform that action. If a lot of users are asking for something, it will usually be true. If you do 300 interviews and only one of them asks for a rocket ship, don't build a rocket ship. That's fairly obvious. But if 299 of them want to build or want one very specific feature, then that means it's a useful feature, especially if those users have used competitor products. So here's an example of a user story or a bunch of user stories. So as a logged in user, I want to be able to report unsuitable content so that the website admin can review or remove the content. And the acceptance criteria for this is that given that I'm a logged in user, when I click on the report button at the bottom of an article, then the system will submit a message to the website administrator that the article has been flagged for unsuitable content, and the system shows the thanks for your report message. So as you can see, an acceptance criteria is just basically a long form version of the user story. And this is just to make sure that we're a little bit specific about it so that, we apply these user stories in very specific context, because you want the error messages. You need to give a lot more information about the user story itself, and that is the acceptance criteria. So there are a lot more here. You can download this deck and kind of go through it. Next is the epics. So what we do after we've written enough user stories is to create epics, which is to bundle them together. In each sprint, when the developers actually start writing code, they kind of take up an entire epic and develop it at once. Because, if a user story comes out with the report function, maybe you want to report negative users, that's not worth telling all your developers to sit together and build it out. You'd rather build all functions that are related to, the admin or the report functioning, right? So you'd like to segment it in some way. So epics are basically stories that are bundled together. So for example, you could have a lot of epics bundled around selecting movie. You could have a lot of epics around buying a movie. You could have a lot of epics around watching movie. You could have a lot of epics around social actions like adding friends or whatever. And this for a simple movie site, right? So these are the higher level activities that a user would accomplish. And each of these epics has a bunch of stories under it. So it's the product manager's job to figure out where each story lies so that at each point you're able to create some bundles together. So you sequence work. It just becomes a little easier for the product management team. So developers and designers rarely work in long stretches. We've spoken about this. They work in sprints. An example is if you're building an app like Netflix, the team builds out the movie player in 2 weeks in a sprint, right? The actual movie player part, the play button, the pause button, whatnot, right? And then spends the next 2 weeks fixing bugs. So it's high energy work followed by low or medium energy work, right? Because people cannot work consistently at high outputs for a long period of time. Then there's the aspect of wireframes, right? So we use something called Mockups.com to create wireframes and mockups. And wireframes are user stories that are represented visually. So when I like to write user stories, what I like to do right after is create mockups or flows of them. And you can use a tool like Mockups, which is free, for a certain amount of, you can do it for free for a bit. And then there's also apps like Framer that allow you to actually create more high fidelity mockups. High fidelity means more realistic mockups, but we don't need realistic mockups. We just need to teach or tell the developers what it's supposed to be like. And a lot of you might be thinking this is easy. You might think it's easy to communicate to a developer using words what you want, but it is not. It is an incredibly challenging task to make a developer or for another person to know exactly what you're thinking, which is why first you create stories, bundle them into epics, and then create wireframes out of them. And we'll do some wireframing, in this episode. Next, there's the idea of sprints. So at Avalon, we use something called Trello.com, which is a free Kanban board. Kanban is basically just a type of board which is segmented into there's basically lines drawn on different sides of the board, like you create many different divisions. And then what we do is we create stories with high importance, or we mark stories as high importance, medium importance, or nice to have. High importance are the ones that need to be created or solved right now. Medium importance obviously is medium importance, you don't need it right now. And nice to have, maybe we'll see 6 months later. So as you can see, there's a board on the left. So as you can see, there's the card holder on the left, and we call it a backlog. And then we create many different card holders. Backlog, this week, ready for review, completed this week, and archive. And I'll actually show you this, right? We're actually going to go through creating a Kanban board ourselves. You're going to see it live. But the idea is that, we can choose to put the ones on this month's backlog, and the developers can just look at the backlog, pick something they're working on today, drag it into this week bucket, and then just code away until it's ready for review where they pull it in the next thing. And then somebody, specifically the product manager or the quality assurance guy in bigger teams, looks at it and says, oh, okay, this is ready for review. Let me review this. And then he actually reviews it and then drops it into the completed this week bucket. Right? And then later, once some time has passed, you just put in the archive, which basically means here are the old tasks that we've completed in the past. Right? And I'll show you an example of this. The next thing is communication in daily stand-ups. So at Avalon and in most other product companies, we do daily stand-ups so everyone can report what they're working on. This is a 10-minute video call followed by a 3 bullet point summary by everyone. On the stand-up, which is, the reason we call it a stand-up is so that everybody stands up so the meeting gets done faster. You see, sitting in like 45-minute, 1-hour meetings like in those movies like Suits is actually a big waste of time. And you'll learn this after doing this for a decade, right? It's a big waste of time. So you'd rather have everybody just stand up because people can't stand up for long periods of time. Everybody quickly reports what they're working on, gets back to work. So everybody on a stand-up mentions what their blockers are. And a blocker is basically something that's preventing you from doing your job. So, for example, I could have a blocker where I could be waiting for, the login or password for, say, a website, and my boss is not giving that to me. And at my stand-up, I can put my hand up and say, hey, boss, you have to give me my login details and password, otherwise I can't do this task. So that becomes your blocker. And you'll be surprised that one of the biggest drawbacks or one of the biggest things that draws away productivity is these blockers. So every day, if you can figure out what everyone's blocker is, you can get things done faster. An example blocker could be Raj has to send me mockups so I can design the homepage. And you tag Raj so he can respond to fix the issue. Now, so far, I've been talking about stand-ups, like physical stand-ups, but you can also do stand-ups on a tool called Slack, which is free. And I think Microsoft Teams is free as well. I don't know if Slack is free anymore because we don't use it anymore. We've moved on to Microsoft Teams. and it's basically pretty much the same thing. You can do stand-ups and communication on some of these tools. And as the businesses become more technology oriented, I think a lot of this remote work, and remote means you don't have to physically be in an office, is gonna start being the next big thing. I don't recommend remote work for new teams or people who've never worked with each other before, but as you gain a little bit of experience, as you work together for a year and a half, it becomes easier and easier to work at a distance. Right? So this was my yesterday, this is my today, here are my blockers, right? 3 bullet points. So on a stand-up meeting, you basically say, yesterday, I fixed this bug. Today, I'm going to build this feature for users to sign in. My blocker is that I'm waiting on Raj for the mockups. That way, everybody involved in your company, including your bosses, people who work under you, the people who work beside you, know exactly what you're up to. So here's an example. You can there's an app called Scrum Genius on Slack which you can use, which basically automatically asks you, what are you working on today? And somebody here has given up. Said, I emailed the technical lead on suggested adjustment to my payment channel or something like that, something very complex. And then the Scrum Genius says, are there any blockers? And you say, none so far. You see, there is very little difference between what's happening on the left and what's happening on the right. The only difference is I prefer to do stand-up meetings in person because you get to know the actual emotional state of something. Because like I mentioned in the past, sometimes there are hidden blockers that people don't know about themselves, right? This is all assuming you have an ideal team, but sometimes some people might have strengths, some people might have weaknesses. And if communication is a weakness, then you're going to run into these issues and challenges. So in the true spirit of things, we're actually going to go out and I'm going to have, multiple people do a stand-up meeting on Slack. And we'll use one of these apps to kind of show you what a stand-up or a daily stand-up looks like. Here we go. Ready? Okay guys, we're going to do a quick stand-up meeting just for the people who are watching this for the first time. You guys are going to tell me what you did yesterday, what you're planning to do today, and what your blockers are. We'll start with you, Sankar.
So I was working on the dashboard yesterday. Today I'm working on the user panel and I have no blockers.
So yesterday I am working on the onboarding flow of Meta. Now today I am working on the dashboard section. It will be finished. So my blocker will be like what to plan for the battle clubs.
Okay.
So yesterday I was working on the chat functionality of the app, syncing the reels in the Phoenix server. Today I'll be working on the dashboard app, creating levels and stuff. And my blockers are, I'm waiting for Sankalp to finish with the mockup so that I can get started.
Okay. So yesterday I had worked for 2 creators for the Battle Cup element. The blocker was basically the design resources were caught with other projects as well. But however, today we got done with that, so we just finished up like 2 minutes back.
What are you working on today?
So we have another 2 creators remaining for the Battle Cup element.
So 2 creators?
Yes, totally 4.
So yesterday my entire day went planning for the Battle Cup. Me and Keshav actually worked on it. So that was what I did yesterday. And today I basically am working on planning the online presence feature so people know in your team who's online and when. And my blocker would be I'm waiting on endpoints from again Keshav on finishing up the presence.
Okay. So the blockers, I think Keshav, you're related to Sankalp on one blocker and you're related to Keshav on blocker. Sankalp starts with you. Okay guys, thank you. Thank you for this session.